This episode of Engineering the Future is brought to you by The Personal, OSPE's home and auto insurance partner. These past few months have shown us just how important it is to have someone in your corner. When it comes to home and auto insurance, The Personal can be that someone. If you would like to learn more about this exclusive program, visit thepersonal.com/OSPE.
This podcast is brought to you by OSPE, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, the advocacy body for professional engineers in the engineering community in Ontario.
Welcome to Engineering the Future, a podcast presented by the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. I am your host, Jerome James. Today I'm joined by Emily Thorn-Corthay, professional engineer and founder of and president of Thorn Associates, an energy and carbon management consulting firm. Emily is also the chair of OSPE's Energy Task Force and is a former OSPE board member. She is the recipient of the 2020 International Energy Engineer of the Year Award from the Association of Energy Engineers. Thank you for joining me today, Emily. I'm looking forward to this discussion around decarbonization, which means reducing the amount of CO2 going into the atmosphere, and energy management, which is it's all about optimizing our energy resources and minimizing the amount of energy we use in our day-to-day lives and in industry. So to start off with, can you start by elaborating on the concept of decarbonization versus energy management, and how are they different and how do they complement each other in your view?
Thank you very much, Jerome. Happy to be here, and thanks for welcoming me to your podcast. So in terms of decarbonization versus energy management, I would say that the fundamental goals, although they can be aligned, they can also be different. So energy management is typically focused on energy cost reduction and energy waste reduction. And decarbonization is really specifically about the carbon dioxide that is being released to the atmosphere. So they can sometimes be very much aligned, whereby, for example, fossil fuels are producing a lot of CO2, but by reducing their use, you'll reduce your energy costs as well. So those can be kind of one and the same. Where they can be different is in a clean electricity grid, such as that of Ontario. Then if you reduce your electricity, you will be improving your energy management by improving or reducing your energy costs, your electricity costs. However, your contribution to decarbonization will actually be minimal, because reducing the electricity is already so clean anyways that reducing it substantially will only provide very small benefit.
Right. Interesting. How does that relate to carbon equivalence? I know that there's talk about measuring the effects of other gases being released by processes in industry. Can you elaborate on what that's all about?
So I believe you're referring to different types of greenhouse gases and their impact on the climate change. And so each different types of, they actually go back to Kyoto Accord gases, but now kind of Paris Accord gases, have different what is called global warming potential. And so, that actually, right, surprisingly with the science, it's revised, even though scientifically it's not actually changing, but our understanding of it is changing. So for CH4 methane, it's been revised. I think originally it was 24, and now the latest is 28. But it in and around about, I would say, around 25 times as potent as CO2. So we always talk in the carbon management world about CO2e, which is CO2 equivalent. And you have to be really careful, because CO2 equivalent is that it's sort of a mathematical formula to account for all of the greenhouse gases, not just carbon dioxide. And the way that you account for it is through this global warming potential value.
Interesting. The science has told us through many different jurisdictions that putting a price on carbon is actually one of the most effective ways of reducing energy or carbon emissions in society. In March, the Supreme Court of Canada upheld the country's federal carbon pricing law, implying that they do have the right to impose such a law on the land, clearing the way to mandate each province to implement their own carbon pricing plans. And if they don't have one to the right standards, they can put out fines and whatnot. What is your view on this, and how does it relate to the energy management field in going forward in Canada?
Yes, great question, and important policy changes. So I think this is a great policy change, and that the most important thing is that it provides certainty in the price increase. It's going up from, in the past few years, it's gone up by $10 per ton of CO2e. Soon it's going to start by going up by $15 per ton. So the rate of increase each year is going to increase, and then by 2030 we'll be hitting $170 per ton. So I think that certainty is really critical. First of all, I think that the price on carbon should be a nonpartisan issue. Actually, putting prices on, pollutants would actually normally be considered a sort of conservative idea, or like the market, the idea of the market, and et cetera. And so, like even the cap and trade program, so I think that really all parties should get behind the science, and
right.
And I think they are to each, different extents, but they all are, which is great, because I think we all live on the same planet, and we all need to together achieve this, just as everybody has come together as a globe to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Everybody really needs to come together to fight climate change and have that same global coordination.
100%. I definitely agree with your sentiments there. Is there a jurisdiction in the world that Canada that could look to see places getting it right on how to manage emissions and reduce carbon emissions and reduce energy consumption overall? Is there a nation or a nation state, a province in the US, in India, and in Europe that's doing something correctly that we can get behind and hold as a mantle of success?
I would say the EU, the European Union in general, like not one specific country, but sort of the EU as a whole has been probably the best worldwide model. Canada is actually up among them. We're not doing so badly ourselves in terms of our targets. We actually haven't not historically met the targets ever, I believe. So that's a different question. But setting targets we're quite good at. The EU, I think,
is a little better at achieving those targets.
Yes. So I personally always, when looking for sort of thought leadership, et cetera, turn to Europe to see what different policies they're enacting, and I think that's a good place to start.
We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. At OSPE, we're here for you, making sure government, media, and the public are listening to the voice of engineers. You can learn more at ospe.on.ca.
Switching gears a little bit, I want to go back to your work at OSPE and involvement in the Energy Task Force. Could you tell me some of the interesting topics that you guys are working on, and what's the future for OSPE's involvement in this space?
Yes, definitely. Actually, the Energy Task Force is very much aligned with decarbonization. There's also an environmental task force that we aim to try and collaborate on joint issues. And right now, the Energy Task Force we are working on two main areas. One is the clean thermal energy. So if you look at sort of areas where there's still lots of carbon in the sort of Ontario, I guess, landscape, then as I mentioned, our electricity is actually not the place to look because it's already very, very clean. What is the place to look is buildings, hence the clean thermal energy, looking at heat pumps for anyone who's, furnace, if they're natural gas furnace, which is a lot of Ontarians or more rural, even propane, et cetera. If you can get to a heat pump that's with clean electricity, that's a fantastic and huge carbon reduction that, our listeners, OSPE members can personally undertake. We at my house, actually, we're doing an addition and we're planning to install a heat pump for that addition. And so we're doing at OSPE the clean thermal energy. Another area is energy storage. So, everybody's talking about renewable energy and how it's sometimes unreliable because it depends on when the wind blows and the sun shines. Well, the key, of course, is energy storage and affordable energy storage. So we are evaluating the economics related to that. And then a final initiative that we released a little while ago, but we're trying to push to become sort of policy, is related to changing of retail electricity pricing plans. And the change would enable electric vehicle owners to be able to take advantage of very low prices. I'm talking about, around the 1 cent per kilowatt hour instead of, for example, the tariff changes, but say 15 cents. So, it's going to be more than a 10 times decrease if the policy that we're advocating is enacted. So we're also hoping that. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Where is the state of technology with regards to energy storage? Is it still being developed? Is it just a will kind of thing right now? Is it better to look at utility grade storage as a solution, or personal storage, decentralized storage? What would you say where the science is on energy storage right now?
So there's many different types of energy storage, and once we release the report, you'll actually see, chemical energy storage, electrical energy storage, mechanical energy storage. So there's a whole bunch of different thermal energy storage technologies, and they are all at different, and within those even sort of their different levels of, I would say, technology readiness or towards commercialization. So I think the most advanced would be your traditional electrical batteries like lithium ion, and they are definitely, ready now for grid scale, utility scale. They are being implemented. The cost has come down significantly. It will continue, in my opinion, to come down substantially. So just as we saw wind and solar have those dramatic, drops in price, energy storage it's behind in terms of its development compared to the renewable energy technologies, but it's coming.
Right.
So
It's very insightful. I wanted to switch gears now and talk about your journey and how you got to be where you are in such a male-dominated industry. How did you get started in energy management within engineering? And if you can tell us a little bit about your journey to where you are now, and tell us about some of the work that you're doing within your company.
Definitely. I think a lot starts as a child, and I was fortunate enough, both my parents, but my mom in particular, really pushed my abilities in math and encouraged me. And so when many of actually other girls were maybe thinking they weren't as good in math, even if they actually were fine or even really good, then I was not discouraged, and I kind of always loved and felt good at math and science, and I think that's really important. And then the next really important step is that I actually chose in high school to take the right courses. So I took all 6 math and science that were needed the requisite courses to get into a university engineering program without, at the time when I chose the courses, I didn't actually even know what engineering was. So I'm the first engineer in the family. And I remember when I learned what engineering was, it was back, I'll be dating myself, but at the time in guidance counselors, we would go in and there were books. So there was no really internet being used and in high school. And so you would go to the book of the university, and I went to Waterloo and I found out, oh, engineering is applied math and science. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever because I didn't like the idea of theoretical. I never liked proofs in math or anything like that, but I loved the practical. I actually, as a kid, wanted to cure cancer, but I can't stand being in hospitals or anything like that. So I abandoned that quickly, and I thought this engineering thing was really great. So from there, got accepted into engineering at Waterloo. And then after school, I did my master's as well. Did a very broad engineering. So I did in my undergrad in systems design engineering, which is kind of like industrial, but it is really actually just sort of generic. And then I kind of, I guess I fell into a passion, which is fuel cells. So I read an article in the Globe and Mail about fuel cells, and I thought this is the coolest technology ever. And so I decided to do my fourth year university project, and then I actually worked in the field, did my master's, specializing in fuel cells, also in mechanical engineering, and then went right into the work world in the fuel cell space. And then to sort of end off, you asked how I got into energy management. After 5 years in fuel cells, at the time that was I guess around 2008 or so. The fuel cells were still nowhere near commercialization at that point, and I thought it was important to broaden my future career prospects. Right. And so energy management seemed to be a bit broader, and went into an engineering consulting company at that point. Stayed there for almost a decade, and then decided to found Thorn Associates about 3.5 years ago, and never looked back. Loved the entrepreneurial life, and just hired actually our first full-time permanent employee. So very excited about that too.
That's great. What kind of work are you guys involved in currently?
We have some really exciting new projects. Actually, we're doing a global climate change strategy for a mining company. We're also working with an industry association on a low carbon reduction roadmap and an energy intensity benchmarking. And we're also just been awarded some funding from an innovation fund. And I can't talk about that because it's confidential, highly confidential, but basically, taking a sort of proof of concept through to demonstration with a partner, et cetera. So some really exciting work.
That's great. And it was great to hear about your background. Little do the listeners know that we both wrote our master's thesis on the same technology. Both did something in fuel cells back in the day. So that's a little similar common thread between the two of us. I want to ask you about engineers and engineering in general. What should the average engineer be thinking about when they think about sustainability? Is this only for energy management engineers, or should the common everyday engineer be thinking about these concepts? And if so, how can they implement smart sustainability into their everyday practice?
That's a great question, Jerome. I would say, first of all, 100% non-energy management or carbon engineers should, 100%, I would hope, be thinking about sustainability. All engineers, even if you're not an expert in that field, have an advantage over the general population in terms of the contribution that we can make because of our technical expertise and ability to problem solve and ability to think critically and understand complex information. So first of all, I think, again, we have those abilities. And then in terms of putting them into action, there was actually a fantastic report from the former Ontario Environmental Commissioner. Unfortunately, the Environmental Commission office was decommissioned. But the last report that they put out before it was the office was no longer, was on the average Ontarian's carbon footprint. And it's quite interesting. The top four things that account for over 50% of the average Ontarian's carbon footprint are, number one, in order, driving. We're not doing as much of that. This was pre-pandemic, but still, it'll come back. So we need to get to our EVs, and we do have an EV, which is fantastic. Number two, after driving, is home heating. So we need to reduce our again, carbon footprint with our heating through, for example, heat pumps. Flying. So flying, again, I can't actually, those might be 2 and 3, but certainly the flying has gone down because no one's flying. But when we do go back, what we do is we have family in Europe, we do fly, but we at least purchase carbon offsets. It's not perfect, but electric airplanes are coming as well sooner than we think. Short haul should be available for 2025. And
wow, that's close.
Yeah, it is. It's closer than most people think. And Canada, actually, out in BC, we did one of the first electric flights either in 2019 or 2020, sort of still testing. But anyways, they exist, electric planes. They're just can't yet get, I guess, commercially purchased flights. And the last one is eating beef. So I would say to the average Ontarian, on your carbon footprint, that's specific. And then also just generally, if you can reduce your waste, don't buy as many clothes, don't buy as many toys for your kids. Try and reuse from your family, both, clothes and toys, etc., when you can, and just try and generally reduce waste.
For sure. And I've started to read press releases from car companies talking about ditching the internal combustion engine altogether by a certain date, and rolling out electric lines that you never even dreamed that it would be happening so quickly, from SUVs right down to, your subcompact. These things are moving very quickly right now.
Absolutely. I think, again, faster than most people would have realized. I believe there was 3 different announcements in Ontario of new EV, electric vehicle manufacturing that's happening or going in the works. And that's huge. That's great. We have our mining resources that can, mine different components that are needed for electric vehicles, and we have lots of smart engineers to do all the consulting and engineering design and all of that to make that happen. So right. Ontario could be a real leader in the EV world, and it's a huge market. It's the only market actually that's going to be there in the future. So we need to get on board, and every EV owner that I know, myself included, would never go back to an internal combustion engine. They're just so fun, quiet, they're fast, and in addition to just not polluting, right? And so they're great.
Excellent. Thank you for your insights today on all things energy management and decarbonization. I have one last question for you, and that is with regards to OSPE. You're such a great OSPE ambassador and involved in so many things within OSPE. Can you answer the question why you are an OSPE member?
Yes, I guess many different reasons. Probably the first or most important reason is that I think it's essential that we advocate to government so that they can hear the engineer's perspective, and that government can therefore enact technically sound policies. Again, I'll parallel it to the COVID crisis. The government has, tried generally. There's been generally to listen to, the medical scientific community and try, or they should, we'll say that they have been trying to listen, or at least publicly announce that, right? So right. I think the same goes on the energy management carbon space, that we need to really make sure that government is hearing the engineer's perspective. So I would say that's the number one. And then for all the listeners who might not understand the power and importance of advocacy, because that takes a bit of time in your journey. And if you're earlier in your career, I would just say I started with a salary survey. That alone is a reason to join OSPE. That was the original reason way back when I was a student. That alone is reason enough. And then there's all these other benefits in terms of insurance, et cetera. But the advocacy is really the key piece.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Emily. Emily Thorn-Corthay is a professional engineer and founder and president of Thorn Associates, an energy, carbon, and carbon management consulting firm.
Thank you so much, Jerome.
From all of us at OSPE, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, thanks for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.